Black Financial Channel, also the Chief Operating Officer of the Black Business School. And today, our very special guest is Shirley McAlpine. Shirley is the CEO of Shirley McAlpine and Associates. It is a transformational coaching and consulting firm specializing in leadership, anti-racism, and diversity and inclusion. You can find out more about her at shirleymcalpine.com. Shirley, Shirley, McAlpine, McAlpine.com. And today we'll talk about a lot of things. Actually, we talk about what's going on in the world, and we can also talk about what's going on with her business development. So, Shirley, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it as well. So for the audience, can you tell them a little bit more about Shirley McAlpine and Associates and how you've gotten to this point in your career?
Yes, sure. So first, as you can hear, I'm from the UK. And so I started my business way back over 20 years ago doing consulting and coaching in London. And then in the last 8 years, I've been running my business in the US. And I specialize in leadership development and executive coaching, and as well as a focus on anti-racism, diversity and inclusion. And I've been doing that. So I kind of was working in that field before I decided to set up my own entity 20 plus years ago, like 22 years ago, and have just been building it on from there. And I work with a wide range of organizations, from large corporates like BP or L'Oreal to small, not-for-profits or foundations, and then smaller organizations, and I have a number of passion projects. So for years it's been a more traditional coaching consulting business, and then last year, lucky for me, in January 2020, I launched an online training business where I focused around developing a program called Execute Your Dream, which is aimed at women, and particular focus on Black women, on how do you develop the life that you really want. And so I launched that in January, which meant that I was ready for delivering an online training. So that started to influence the other work that I went on to do around anti-racism and so on in 2020.
So we're living, in very interesting times. And I was going to start about, I usually start about a person's business and going deeper on that side. But let's start on the flip side in terms of current events, in terms of what's going on. So can you talk about why diversity and inclusion work is important, and how is it playing out currently with what's going on with COVID mixed with Black Lives Matter and all of these social unrest going on in the United States?
Yeah, well, I've been working on D&I, diversity inclusion, or diversity, equity and inclusion for as long as I've been in career. I want to say from the beginning of my career, like at the age of 18, I did an internship at the Cabinet Office in the UK, and it was in the inequality unit. And that's where I discovered that you could, understood about fairness and the lack thereof, if you like, around race and gender and all of those things before. But at 18, I discovered that you could work in that and the type of work that you could do. And so when I started to do work, it was always been a thread running through my work. And I held roles in organizations, responsibility for equity in organizations. So when I started to set up my business, it was important that was a key aspect of the work that I do. And it's important because even 20 years on, I'm still having the same conversations with organizations about how do you transform the cultures such that, number one, you start to have a much more diverse workforce. Number two, they get access to the same levels of opportunities for progression and fulfilling their potential. And three, that the culture is one that's welcoming, and that people get to express themselves and be who they are in those organizations. And so I'm still doing the similar work that I was doing 20 years ago. And that's what's so disappointing in some respects. And in fact, the anti-racism work that I'm now doing is after a spell. Like, I took a spell where I wasn't offering that as a service. I needed to take a break from it. And then last year, with what happened with George Floyd's murder, I really felt compelled that I have to get back in the ring with being more direct in doing the anti-racism work with organizations and individuals, because it just felt even more urgent than it's ever felt before. Like I hesitate because we're the date that we're recording this, we're just 2 days after the happenings and the criminal activity and insurrection that happened in DC. And so, you know, we can't get away from it, but certainly the work, we have to keep holding people's feet to the fire to keep doing the work, because we just go through cycles of people being outraged, but not being outraged long enough to actually implement action over time. So, so I have the privilege of working with organizations now. I think I'm really choiceful about the organizations that I work with, because I'm testing to see how committed are they. And I know enough about what to look for true commitment to change, that there are some people and organizations that I just won't engage with working with anymore. So well, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I want to go deeper into that then, because I can hear some of the frustration and emotion in your voice when you talk about this, because this is something that you've dedicated, you know, over 20 years of your life to, and you've seen, or you haven't seen, the type of change that you would have liked to see, right? Yeah. So going back to that question, though, in terms of, you know, why should organizations, you know, care about, you know, this particular type of work? And do you think that is a pathway for, I guess, you know, the Black community to make, you know, additional advances in different communities, first in the United States, but then also, you know, worldwide, you know, since you are an international, I guess, immigrant, I don't know, call it expat or whatever it is, you know, to the United States.
I'm an immigrant. Just like
yeah, that's what I say. I always say I'm an immigrant. Yeah. I always say an expat is just an immigrant with a little bit more money. I think
it's really interesting, even as you said it, because people don't relate to, if you're from the UK, then they don't relate to you as an immigrant. But I am an immigrant, you know, like any other immigrant. I mean, obviously, I came with more wealth, if you like, than some people. But yeah, so there's so many questions of why does it continue to be important, and what inroads. The work that I do is I look at what I call a systemic view, right? So it's not, look at what's the environment and how do we shift the environment such that people thrive, whether I'm coaching individual leaders or whether I'm working with a team to look at the whole organization. And organizations are critical to the transformation of, or the dismantling of, racial oppression and dismantling systemic white advantage, because it shows up in organizations. You know, people have to work, they have to, and they want to work, and they want to do their best and be their best selves, and Black and brown people should have the opportunity to be that and do that in the places where they choose to work. And for far too long, we have seen patterns of the systemic oppression and racism being playing out in organizations. So leaders have, and it's really on leaders, that they have to look at their own systems and say, what do we need to do that's different, and how do we do it, and are we willing to be courageous enough to make the changes that's necessary in order to transform how they're leading their businesses and how they're doing business. So that's the one side. And the other side is, how do we empower people to deal with the barriers that come up? So how do we empower Black people and brown people to deal with the barriers that they inevitably face when they are working in the various organizations? So part of the work with the program that I designed, Execute Your Dream, came out of also having coached a number of senior Black women, and irrespective of where, you know, what organization they're in, I was seeing the patterns of their experience as Black leaders. And so it's like, so there's, how do we come at it in two ways? One is working with the system to transform the system, but I got more interested as well in how do I support and empower individuals to deal with the barriers and the obstacles that we just keep facing in organizations. And I can tell you, it's really, as I said, I've worked with so many different types of organizations with women in them, and they are facing very similar barriers. And so it's not about, so that tells me it's not the organization, it's about the system that's at play, the system of oppression that's at play.
Well, let's talk about the system of inequality within the workplace, and then I also want to talk about the incentives for the leaders to actually make change. Right. So let's get more specific. What are some of the key things that you see happen in the workplace? And I'm sure many people who are watching this are experiencing those things. But specifically, what are you seeing as, I guess, barriers and the effects of the system, for Black and Brown employees?
Yeah.
And then, we'll start with that.
Yeah. So some examples are, well, one is people don't actually get access to the roles. Oftentimes recruitment processes are informal in organizations, even if they go out to adverts, they'll have an informal process that's running internally. So then it's based on who people know. So that's a barrier. Then if you get into the organization, having to spend more time in a level before you get promotion, not getting access to projects which give you high visibility, which is what you need in order to be seen, in order to be to get other opportunities, not being mentored or sponsored inside of the organizations. And in order to get to the next level, you need sponsorship. Because the decisions that are being made about whether someone gets promoted, you're never in those rooms. So you have to have the relationships with the people who are the decision makers. Comments that are on performance reviews. So for organizations that do performance management, there are some common phrases that are used for people of color in those, or women in those, which then limit what's possible. People not getting the bonuses. If there's a bonus system, they're not getting equity in bonuses, equity in pay. So there's you can see when you are starting off. And the other thing is, are people set up to win in the roles that they take on? So where you might have mentoring is so important. So when you arrive in an organization and you're given a role, is someone there supporting you and to help you understand and navigate the system in a way that happens more, I want to say more organically for people, for people who are in predominantly white spaces. So when you start a role and then you have all these obstacles, then what starts to happen is, one is that you have to work so hard to navigate the obstacles as well as deliver your role, because you don't get to not perform. In fact, you have to often outperform in order to get to the next stage. But you've also got to use your energy to navigate the obstacles. And sometimes people aren't even aware of just how many obstacles there are, or can they read when it's happening, and it's exhausting. So that's a number of them that are the things that we're constantly having to support. And the other thing, I want to say another thing that can happen is the microaggressions that people then deal with every single day is debilitating. And so when you think about the barriers, the systemic barriers that I've described, plus the microaggressions, plus they then have to deliver their work, they're already at an unfair advantage inside of the system. So it's a lot. And when I'm working with organizations who are committed, then it's like, let's look at what are the barriers that exist in your organization and how do we start to dismantle them? Let's look at the microaggressions that exist. And how do you address that? How do you start to deal with that? So there's a lot, and it takes time, but we have to deal with it on both sides. We have to empower Black and Brown communities with navigating it and taking care of themselves in those systems. And we have to support systems with transforming what they need to be doing.
Well, let's talk about those systems of transforming. I guess that's my next question is the incentives for leaders, because I was over here just looking at I thought this was true, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average is the highest it's ever been in the history of the Dow Jones, right? Even though we're going through all this, strife and turmoil, the big companies, that would be, definitely implementing this type of work, they're thriving more than ever, right? And they're thriving a lot of times, especially in the tech sector, without very many Black employees. And many of the Black employees feel marginalized. And I know it goes beyond tech and finance, but those have been some of the main drivers of the economy. So, what, if that's true, if they have been, I guess, performing very well, at least from a financial perspective, without really going to diversity and inclusion and including Black folk and other types of people and women, that type of thing, what incentives do leaders have to change what they've been doing for the last however many years?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think a number of things. One is that research has been done on when you've got an effective diverse team that's working well, diversity, and that's why the inclusion piece is working well together. They produce bigger and better results for businesses. So there is a direct business incentive, that because we know that businesses are interested in the bottom line and innovation, and as well as profit. So it does lead to that. But the other side, and I think one of the things that I'm starting to see in organization, is the generational difference. That there is a push from the younger employees in systems that are saying, this is unacceptable. I don't want to work in a system that perpetuates this. And so I think that's one of the drivers for some organizations today, because they are now going to be competing for those same people. Right, in a way that they, whereas historically we had people who join organizations and willing to stay in them for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that pattern has changed significantly and is set to continue to change, where people are just not willing to stay in organizations that long, and that will certainly walk on the basis of the environment. And so what I'm seeing is the energy of a younger populace, if you like, in the organization, demanding more of their senior leaders, and senior leaders starting to kind of say, well, actually, we need to pay attention, as well as the kind of the groundswell of activity that's happening in the environment in this moment, if in 2020, which is bringing a more moral argument. And so I think the combination of those things is having leaders stop and say, okay, what are we doing? And the third is the consumer. We've seen a shift in that, where certainly Black and brown communities are starting to begin to understand more fully what is the power of our dollar and where we put our money. And I think that it's the biggest shift that I've seen last year in that. I think that's going to continue to grow. We need to do that as Black communities. We need to be much more diligent about where we spend and what we do. And then the third is that I'm on 3 or 4. The last thing
there we go.
The last thing is when I work with systems, I'm asking them to look at the changes they need to make more broadly. So I'm not just talking about employees. I'm talking about who are your vendors, who are your contractors. Do you know what I mean? how do you do business, and how do you transform how you do business so it's inclusive? And it's not just about employees.
Yeah, and that was my very next question. So let's like transition to that a little bit more, because we talk about Black people coping within these particular systems as employees. And I think, to a large degree, we've come to accept that is the way things have to be, or a lot of people have just come to accept that. I know we work with a lot of individuals who say, I would like to leave my corporate job, but the pay is so good that I don't really want to take that risk. But what I'm going to do is invest in my child so they have better and more opportunities than I had at age 22 or 25 or whatever it might be. But I want to know, I guess, what you think about, I guess, Black people getting out of the system, I guess, like you did, right?
I got out of the system, yes.
Yeah. You consult on the system, but it's your thing that you're consulting on.
Yeah.
But then also, once they're out, what is the role for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how could they still benefit from just the different things going on in the sphere?
Yeah. So I think that there's so much. Now, we know there's no shortage of Black talent because that in all of this DEI conversation, it's not through lack of talent and Black talent that's out there. It's that the organizations aren't harnessing that Black talent, and then when they have them in the organization, they're really not allowing them to thrive. And so in the end, people get annoyed, it gets exasperated and they leave. So if you see the other pattern you see in organizations is when they do have Black talent, they get to a certain level and then you'll see some attrition. And so it'll start to bleed because they get to a level and they're like, oh, it's still bad up here. So even when I get to a senior level, it's still awful. And so some people leave and they set up their own businesses. I think until organizations start to transform, you'll continue to see the attrition because it becomes too much. And I actually feel like even though I did that, I had the same, I was done. So I did that 20 plus years ago. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur or wants to be an entrepreneur. And there are some people who are leaving their businesses, leaving their organizations to set up businesses and are not making a good enough living out of their businesses. And there are others who are setting up the business and are absolutely nailing it and absolutely thriving. And I think one of the ways that Black communities are going to build wealth is through entrepreneurship. I mean, and then we can, as Black people build their own businesses, then they will more likely employ Black people. And so I think that's an important aspect of building wealth in Black communities. But I actually feel like we need to make sure that organizations transform so it allows people to make a choice, not from feeling desperate, but really feeling like I am an entrepreneur at heart. I need to go and set up my business, but not versus I have to set up my business because this is untenable for me. And so I'd like to see a world where we get closer to both of those things. But in the meantime, if someone needs to leave, I'd like to make sure that when people do leave, that they are set up to win in their own entities. Does that answer your question? I can't remember if I went
on. No. I mean, I think you did answer. That
I think it's one thing.
And then also supplier diversity and other types of things.
Yeah.
You can still benefit from the diversity and inclusion work. Once you do decide to go on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I want to say, though, about DEI in organizations, which I see, and I think we need to pay attention, and how you can start to see whether someone's serious, an organization is serious. Many people have DEI roles, chief diversity and inclusion officers, and so on. But one thing we need to check is how do they have a team? How much money how big is their budget? What's the strategy? How many people in the team in relation to the size of the organization? Is it funded as a business unit, just like any other business unit? Or is it underfunded? And one of the patterns that we see in organizations is having the DEI role, but not actually relating to it as a business unit that requires the same amount that requires a budget and a strategy that needs to be implemented, and it requires resources in order to implement the strategy. So when it's under resourced, it's never going to deliver on what people expect it to deliver. And I see that pattern time and time again. So if you want to, that's one place to look. If you want to see it, is this organization serious about its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? See what they're doing around their DEI function and how they're setting it up, or how they're approaching the whole strategy, and that will tell you something about it, because organizations definitely need to do better in that regard.
Everyone, I'm here today with Shirley McAlpine. Shirley is the CEO of McAlpine and Associates. It's a transformational coaching and consulting firm specializing in leadership, anti-racism, and diversity and inclusion. You can find out more about Shirley at her website, shirleymcalpine.com. That's Shirley, SHIRLEY, McAlpine, MCALPINE.com. So if you all like this video, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button. Please make sure you share and subscribe to the Black Financial channel if you would like to receive more financial content like the content that we're producing today here with Shirley. Shirley, let's get into your business a little bit. So you have had your company for a really long time. You started in the UK, and then you moved to the United States. I want you to talk about how it's like being an immigrant and running a business in the United States versus the United Kingdom. What are the similarities and what are some of the differences as a Black woman?
So when I started, one of the things I want to say, when I left the UK, we didn't move with a company other than my own. We didn't move with like a big corporation or anything. So what happened was it meant that I left my clients behind. Apart from one, I was working with a global company at the time, so I was able to continue that work from the US. And so by that time, I'd been in business, obviously, for like 12 years. There are many similarities in terms of the work that I'm doing around leadership and around equity and so on, because the fundamentals around who you are as a leader and how you show up as a leader is the same, you know, whether you're in the UK or in the US. I think one of the reasons why I wanted to move, so whilst I have issues about where we are today around the issues around race and diversity and inclusion, one of the things I recognized in the UK was we were making so little progress in seeing people like me in leadership roles. And I got tired, you know, I was like, I've been working for so long and I keep going into these systems and working with leaders, and then I'll be lucky if I see a woman in the room, to be frank, and then if I see a Black person in the room, and if I see a Black woman in the room, I mean, I don't, you know, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot one day, you know, so it was so rare. And I had, of course, I had been going back and forth to the US over the years, and I wanted to be in environments where I was more likely to meet someone like myself. And that does happen in the US. You know, I have been fortunate to meet so many more Black leaders since I've been here, and it's still far to go, but we are much further on than where the UK is, and that was a source of frustration. So even though I still had a thriving business there and it was great, you know, it's different in terms of who I get to work with. And, you know, so here I can build a business working with Black female leaders, for example, as a core part of my offering, because I can meet a lot of Black female leaders, you know, so that makes it possible. And then the other is so now I'm also the chair of Empower Her, which is a network that's at the Apollo. It's a women's network, and the money that we raise funds the education program that the historic Apollo runs. And so through those kinds of opportunities, you get to meet so many amazing, badass women, and that doesn't exist in the same way in the UK. So that's one of the fundamentals around that. In terms of my leadership and my leadership development and leadership facilitation and personal development, personal growth, that work is similar. You know, people are, in some respects, we're unique, and in other respects, we are patterns of being human. And so those things are things that I coach people around on how to be their best selves, how to have the life that they want, how to dream big and fulfill your dreams. And so that conversation is the same in the UK as it is in the US, as it is in Angola, when I worked in Angola, or in Lagos, or in you know, anywhere like Baku, those places that I've traveled to deliver work, those fundamentals are still the same. So that's what I would say about the differences and the similarities.
So you could have, I guess, approached this work from many different directions and angles as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What made you ultimately decide on focusing on coaching and consulting as the main part of what it is that you do? And what were some of the other things that you were, I guess, thinking about? And what are some of the other things that you are going to do in the future?
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, from the beginning, when I started my career, I did my internship, as I said, in equity, and then I worked in urban regeneration. But my work in urban regeneration at the time was as a training officer, as it's called a customized training officer. And I was training long-term unemployed people to get back into work in a particular part of London that was a deprived area. And so I started my career in training and development, and then I just kind of built on from there. I went to work in the National Health Service as a training and development manager, and then kind of continued from there. So it meant, and it was a natural progression to set up a business in coaching and consulting, because that's what I was doing. That's where my skill set was. And I have gone on, done other things. I did a film called Birthwise with a partner that I had for that business, which was a complete deviation, which is still sold to this day on Amazon, which is a DVD, a child prenatal childbirth DVD, 5-star rated. It was a fun project, but it was always running alongside my existing business. I'd never felt that I was going to kind of steer away from that. And then the online training part of my business is, again, it's a natural progression from doing my coaching and consulting. It's like, how do I reach more people through my work? So I started I have a masterclass for white allies that was launched after George Floyd's murder last year, and called Time to Elevate. And then I have the Execute Your Dream program aimed at women. And so that feels like a natural progression. Now, it doesn't mean there hasn't been times when I have thought about doing something completely different, because I'm very creative. I love to, in my spare time when I have it, I love to kind of sew. I sew like leather bags, and, I'm into fashion and stuff like that. So I have at times thought about, should I start something that's in that creative realm? And then I'm like, it feels too hard,
you only do so much,
to start all of that. And then that's a whole different world. And then I love what I do. I love the difference I get to make. I think one of the things about coaching is you work with people over a period of time, so you see the results of working together. And it's a real privilege to kind of contribute to people in that way and to see transformation. So I really, really enjoy that. And I don't necessarily feel like I want to leave that behind. Maybe in a few years' time, I might get to kind of, I always think if I start selling leather handbags, it won't be fun anymore. It won't be. So I just keep it as a thing that I do. In terms of building my business out, I think I have very clear approaches on how I work with organizations and how I work with individuals. And I think I'd love to kind of build out the number of associates that work under Shirley McAlpine Associates, and pursuing much larger contracts and stuff like that. So that's really where I'm taking the business. I've been inspired to do more of that with Shirley McAlpine and Associates, and building out my online footprint as well is where the direction of it's going in all the realms that I care about, doing that work.
Got you. Perfect. So if someone wants to use your services, and let's say they're working for a company, there's I really like Shirley, I would like to, learn more about her. How can people learn more about you and what you have to offer?
Sure. So the best thing would be to reach out to me, to be honest, and you can contact me at shirleymcalpine.com. My email is my name, shirley@shirleymcalpine.com, and just let me know, and we can jump on a call and figure out if there's synergy in terms of what you want to work on and what I have to offer. So yeah, absolutely. That's the best way to get in contact with me, is either from my website or just email me. I have Instagram and all of that, but the best way is there.
Perfect. So before we get out of here, so reach out to Shirley, like she said, and like I said, reach out to Shirley if you have DE&I work that she could definitely work on. You also have a new course coming out too, right, for Black women?
Yeah, so my course kind of launches periodically. Execute Your Dream. So if you are someone who is committed to living your dream life versus the life that you have, and listen, there could be nothing wrong with the life that you have, but are we really living the life that we really want. And given these times, which are really tell us how precious life is. So the program is about you supporting you with dreaming big and then getting into action on your dreams so you can have your dream life. So get in contact me with that. And I also do obviously executive coaching and coaching of senior Black women. So if you're a senior Black woman and need some support, please contact me.
Perfect. So before we get out of here, Shirley, I have 5 questions that I ask all of our guests to end each interview, and I would like to ask you the same. You ready?
Yep.
All right, number 1, what is your favorite book of all time? Actually, your favorite business book of all time.
Favorite business book? How to Be a Resonant Leader.
I have never heard of that one before. So How to Be a Resonant Leader. Okay. Do you know the author? Or
it's Fran Johnston and Richard Boyatzis and Annie McKee.
Okay,
I use that book a lot with my clients.
Got you. Okay. So How to Be a Resonant Leader. Okay, perfect. My next question is, are there any leaders or companies that you're currently following that you would like to emulate with Shirley McAlpine and consulting or consultants? Any
leaders I'm currently following? I tell you, this seems like I'm currently reading A Promised Land, Barack Obama. And I think it's a really good book. What I think is fascinating is hearing his story as the leader going through his journey in leading versus what we have been, or what I have been holding from an outside perspective. And so it's a fantastic leadership book. So I think if there's someone that I think there's a lot to emulate about how he has been so thoughtful and understands that he's taken decisions sometimes even when they weren't popular, and understood the impact that decision has on him. So,
I read that book, and it's probably my favorite book of 2020, or definitely top 3 books that I read in 2020. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, insightful, and I think that every leader or aspiring leader should really read that book, because It's really a case study. To me, it's a case study on leadership, whether you agree with his policies and his politics or not. That book is definitely a case study on leadership in terms of what you might have done in some of the situations that he was going through.
Because sometimes leadership is about, it's like you got a tough decision and another tough decision, and you have to make one of the tough decisions. It isn't always about the ability to do what you really want to do. And so in the time that you want to do it. And there's so many factors that come into play. And I think it's a good demonstration of that. And then when you can fulfill on the things that you really want, then you go for it. And it's about, in the moment, can you be courageous? And if you're not, the impact, there's so much in there. So I'm with you. I think everyone should read that. So that's a leader, I think. And then there's Michelle, of course, she's kind of like leader, but kind of sister friend in my mind, like a sister friend. And her book's another one where I felt more, as I read her book, I felt like I could have written it without being in the White House. Take out the White House piece, but the experiences that she shares and the journey and what the kind of challenges that she's faced, I felt like she really embodied those things that I've experienced. So that would be the other one. Yeah.
Well, that leads to my next question. Who is your favorite historical figure from Black history?
I'm going to say, so many people running through my mind right now. I'm going to say Nelson Mandela.
Okay. All right. And why is that?
I think he had the foresight to know at which points to push, at which points to negotiate, at which points to stand up, and then when to forgive. And even though there were so many decisions near the end, particularly, that I think I wouldn't necessarily have aligned with him on some of the things around how he managed, the conversation around AIDS and stuff like that. But he was just a phenomenal human being. And yeah, he kind of, and he was also, that was also happening in my lifetime in a way that the Martin Luther King story isn't, for example, or other stories. So I grew up with, in the UK, people stand outside the South African embassy, you know, protesting until he got released. I remember when they released him, I remember watching that on TV. So it's, you know, the history happening in my lifetime in a way that had such a big impression on me. And that he was so forgiving was just phenomenal for a man who spent so many time, so many years. And then I've been to Robben Island, you know, so it feels the connection to this historical figure as well. So.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that's a great choice. So Nelson Mandela. Number 4, how many hours of sleep do you get at night?
At least 8. If I can get 10, I'm in good shape.
Oh, that's on the high end. I've never heard anyone say 10. But
at least 8, 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's,
I'm getting older. The older you get, you can't hack it.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. So no, that's awesome. So okay. And my last question is, if you can go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell her?
What would I tell Shirley, the 20-year-old? I'll tell her to trust herself. She's going to do okay. She's going to go to places that you won't even imagine you're going to go to.
Got you.
Yeah,
perfect.
I'd say. And be bold, actually. That's the other thing.
Be bold. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go back to myself the same. Be a little bit more bold.
Be more bold. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Shirley, well, thank you so much for your time today. So as a reminder, everyone, I've been talking with Shirley McAlpine. Shirley is the CEO of Shirley McAlpine and Associates, a transformational coaching and consulting firm specializing in leadership, anti-racism, and diversity and inclusion. You can find out more about her company at shirleymcalpine.com. That's shirleymcalpine.com. Before you get out of here, please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the Black Financial Channel if you would like to receive more financial content like the content that we produced today here with Shirley. So on behalf of Shirley McAlpine, my name is Lawrence Watkins. You all take care, be blessed, and have a wonderful day. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.